Hi, my name is Kim Travers, and I am the intern here at Sports Philanthropy Network. Thank you for joining us today for the NIL and NFT panel. I'm now going to hand it over to Scott, our moderator, to begin.
Great, thanks so much, Kim. Thanks for those that have joined us already, and for future those that might join us in the future. So my name is Scott Weingust. I am going to moderate and participate on the panel about NIL and NFT, and we'll spend some time. I'm getting feedback. We'll spend some time defining those terms, but before we jump into the content, why don't the three of us on the panel, myself, Darren and Dan, why don't we introduce ourselves and let the audience know kind of who we are and how we approach this subject. Darren, you want to go first?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Scott. My name is Darren Heitner. I am based in usually beautiful Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's actually been raining all day, but you can't see that behind me. I've been practicing law for 11 years now. I've had my own firm, Heitner Legal, for 7. I also teach sports law at my alma mater at the University of Florida Levin College of Law. And I've written a couple of books, working on my third, called How to Play the Game, What Every Sports Attorney Needs to Know. And my involvement in NIL actually goes many years back when I was writing at Forbes. I was covering why athletes have or should have had these rights for a very long time. I've always considered myself to be an athlete advocate, but it was the tail end of 2019 when I was asked by a representative in the state of Florida, Chip LaMarca, who actually represents my district, as well as his legislative aide, to assist in drafting legislation on this very subject, giving college athletes rights, name, image, and likeness rights in the state of Florida, which actually are called publicity rights, but we've made it easy and we just call it NIL. We looked at California's law, which was the only one that had actually become a law at that point in time. And we started looking at what we could do better than California and what we had to do in order to get it passed through the House and Senate in Florida before ultimately going to Governor Ron DeSantis to be signed. And one of the big things, and the reason why we're really here now talking about it, is because our law was the first to have a July 1, 2021 effective date. California had 2023. And in fact, when we first drafted the legislation, we had a July 1, 2020 effective date. It wasn't until the bill passed the House, went to the Senate, that it got pushed to July 1, 2021. Since then, many states have followed, and I've been involved in various facets of this industry, and it's just starting. It's very fascinating. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks so much. Other panelists here is Dan Murphy. Dan, you want to give a little introduction about yourself?
Sure, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I'm Dan Murphy. I'm a investigative reporter and a staff writer at ESPN. Cover a variety of different topics, but spent a lot of time in the college sports world and sort of the legislative legal process of what happens in college sports. So for the past, I guess going on 2 years now, I've been following the development and changes in college sports, specifically around name, image, and likeness rules and what those athletes will be allowed to do, and learning a lot about the industry from people like Darren and many others as I try to catch up on all that. And all of this the panel is really well timed. All of this is coming to a head later this week, July 1st. As Darren mentioned, it will be a humongous change in college sports and something we've been paying a lot of attention to. And, along with the opportunity for athletes to start making money from their market value, it also, as we'll get into, I've talked to a lot of people who are excited about the opportunities, especially at the college level, to raise money for causes that are near and dear to them. So I think we'll see a lot more of that in the coming months and years from college athletes.
Great, thanks, Dan. So just for a short introduction of myself, so my name is Scott Weingust. I'm a managing director at a firm called Stout. We're a consultancy, about 400 client-facing professionals. I lead this firm's intellectual property valuation practice. So my job is to value things like name, image, and likeness, or right of publicity, as we often call it. I also value things like trademarks, patents, trade secrets, copyrights. So I get involved in projects where we're valuing things like name, image, and likeness, or NFTs, for all sorts of purposes. It could be to help companies enter into some sort of transaction where they may be using name, image, and likeness of a celebrity, or maybe on behalf of the celebrity who wants to enter into a deal and is trying to figure out deal terms. We do valuations for tax compliance, mainly trust and estate purposes. We see a lot of celebrities performing transactions where they are using their name, image, and likeness as an asset that they can gift to their heirs. And so valuations are a requirement from the IRS's perspective for things like that. And then sometimes there's litigation issues where people are suing those who are using their name, image, and likeness without permission. I live in Chicago. There was a big case a couple of years ago where Michael Jordan sued a couple of local grocery store chains who used his image in some related to some coupons they were hawking in the local papers. And there's millions of dollars at stake in a lot of these types of issues. So that's my kind of unique perspective from kind of valuation perspective. So Dan and Darren, let's start by talking about kind of what these assets are first, just kind of level set, make sure everyone in the audience is on the same page. We've got a lot of acronyms here, NIL and NFT. Do one of you guys want to start with NIL and tell us a little bit about what that is? I know, Darren, you gave a little bit of background here, but maybe you can just define it, and then either one of you can handle NFTs, or I'm happy to myself if you'd like.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to hog the mic, so I'll pass it to you on NFTs, although I have done a lot of legal work in that space, and I know it's a budding new space. But NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. And it's interesting that all these laws and all the rules that have been created thus far are all under the guise of name, image, and likeness, NIL. But in reality, the rights that athletes are receiving are related to what's called rights of publicity. And those rights are derived from an individual's right to privacy, believe it or not. But this whole concept of right of publicity surrounds this concept that individuals should be able to control the commercialization of themselves, anything that resembles them. So name, image, and likeness obviously are three big elements of an individual's right of publicity, but it can go into more than that. It can go actually into an individual's autograph. It can go into a number that is acquainted with an individual. Anything that causes someone to believe that the individual is a part of something. And so what's most important about right of publicity, and there's various laws that have been created across the country, is that a third party can't use someone's right of publicity, name, image, and likeness, et cetera, in a commercial manner, advertising or promotional activity, without an individual's consent. About half of the states in the country have codified this by statute over time, my state of Florida being one of them. The statute, and I know this by heart because I've litigated on it many times, is 540.08. And so in theory, and then the rest of the country tends to recognize an individual's right of publicity, but it comes from case law that's developed over time as opposed to a statute that's on the books. And there's nuances between the precedent that's been established in some states as opposed to others, as well as the statutes and so on and so forth. So what's interesting, I guess, about all of this is technically everybody has this right of publicity except for one class of individuals, college athletes. Why? Not because any state or the federal government has denied them these rights. In fact, the federal government has never gotten involved in rights of publicity, which, by the way, also makes this so interesting because there are federal bills that have been introduced to explicitly provide college athletes a right of publicity when the rest of the country doesn't have that right nationally by Congress. So what I was getting to was all individuals have this right except for college athletes because of what the NCAA has done over time. Within its bylaws, it has restricted athletes from benefiting in any way monetarily, except to the extent that they receive cost of attendance. There was recently a big case in the Supreme Court concerning academic-related benefits. There can't be a cap on that anymore. So now all of a sudden we're talking about name, image, and likeness, with the NCAA probably removing its restrictions and allowing individual schools to create policies where the states haven't done it. But really, this whole issue could have been ameliorated years ago if the NCAA would have just simply changed its own rules, because otherwise every single individual has this right to publicity.
Great, thanks, Dan. Appreciate that insight. I guess, Dan, do you want me to take a shot at NFTs, or would you like to take a look at that?
You may have a little more than me, but yeah, non-fungible tokens, right, is basically a great opportunity for people to take advantage of their name, image, or one opportunity for people to take advantage of their name, image, and likeness in creating some unique products that I think are a great fit for sports in the way that an athlete can connect to fans, or a fan can connect to athletes, probably more likely, and feel like they have some type of exclusive ownership over whether it's a highlight or a kind of a digital trading card or some type of specific thing from an athlete. We see the NBA has really been at the forefront of a lot of those with its the highlights that it's been selling as NFTs months ago. And I think it'll be a really interesting space to see how college athletes use that as name, image, and likeness rights come online for them.
And I think one of the things that's notable is that the NFTs are particularly interesting because they're backed up by blockchain technology. And so there's essentially, as I understand it, this digital ledger that exists where the non-fungible token, which really speaks to the uniqueness of the asset. One asset exists through blockchain. We can identify who owns that asset without any questions, and that asset could be sold to other people through the blockchain system, and you can't create duplicates of it. So it is a really interesting type of thing. You're right. I think the NBA, from a sports perspective, the NBA with their Top Shots, where they're basically selling these non-fungible tokens that relate to the rights to really just, I think, look at the videos and kind of be the owner of, not the owner necessarily, but kind of have the rights to view and show certain highlight videos. They've really been at the forefront. That, there's also another really interesting one that I was reading about earlier today as I was preparing for the talk, which was there's a soccer league, kind of like a fantasy league for soccer, where folks collect non-fungible tokens related to soccer players, like cards, basically pictures of them, and then they can use them in games and they can trade them and things like that. That's another one that kind of jumped out at me. So, we paired these two terms together, NIL and NFT. Can one of you guys talk about, and Dan, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about, why are these two things linked together in a conversation like this?
Well, I mean, in order for I think somebody to sell an NFT, they need to have the ability to make money from their name, image, and likeness. Well, presuming that they themselves are featured in the NFT, right? Like where we've seen this in sports, like we said, that some of the highlight reels or a digital trading card or something like that, right? You'd need to have the opportunity and the rights to make sure that you can profit from your own name, image, and likeness. So it's something that pro athletes have enjoyed for a little while, that all of a sudden there's going to be another few 100,000 athletes who have the ability to make these kind of NFTs, and marketing them to a niche and specific audience, which I don't know a ton about the NFT marketplace, but I feel like that's probably a good fit based on the type of people who are interested in purchasing that kind of thing. So it will be a new opportunity. And I think as NIL rights open up for college athletes, a lot of it tends to be focused on new technology and how athletes might easily cash in on these types of things without having to spend a whole lot of time, because most college athletes are pressed for time with school and their sport, the work they have to do in their sport. And so being able to create an NFT or being able to monetize some of the social media presence that they have are some of the big opportunities that a lot of people are predicting college athletes will get involved in quickly.
Yeah, and just to add to that, one of the things that I always think about is, for all eternity, athletes have had opportunities to take advantage and make money from the name, image, and likeness. The classic one is, signing a picture and selling it to a fan, or signing, a baseball player sign a baseball, a basketball player sign a basketball. So you have not necessarily your image and likeness, but your signature, which could be covered under some of the NIL laws around the country. And this is just a new digital way to do that, right? It's just almost like a digital photograph, perhaps, with your signature. You can even attach NFTs to, as I understand it, tangible assets, and basically pair them together. So this is just a new opportunity to make money from name, image, and likeness. As from a valuation perspective, the way that I think of things, this just opens up a whole new stream of potential revenue for athletes and other celebrities to monetize their name, image, and likeness. So that's really, I think, the main way to think about the connection.
Yeah, and two reasons why I think that, one of the reasons why I think that works well in the college athlete space is that there are, for a lot of college athletes, there will be two kind of separate but kind of core markets that are interested in them. The hometown where they grew up, where a lot of college athletes might have local interest from people that want to support them, and the campus community where they're at school at the time. And when the athlete's on campus where they spend most of their time, it would be hard to go sell autographs at the local bank in the town where they grew up. It would be much easier to try to create an NFT and put that out there to the local community in some way. It might be a more convenient way for college athletes to make a little bit of money off of that. And Scott, I'm interested in one of the things that I've been trying to figure out for almost 2 years in covering this is what this marketplace, how you actually value a college athlete's worth. And I know there are companies that have put out algorithms based on sort of social media presence and that kind of thing. But I'm curious if you were to go about trying, and there's a huge scope, right, of different athletes who have all different skill sets and followings, and how you would go about trying to, put a value on this brand new marketplace and what kind of challenges that presents.
Yeah, so I mean, if I were to have a college athlete come to me and ask me to value their name, image, or likeness, the most likely way to think about doing that would be using what we call an income approach. It's basically a discounted cash flow model where we're projecting how much money can you make from your NIL rights in the future, and what are those future cash flows worth today, essentially. And so it requires the projection of what kind of money you can make in the future, which, it's almost a fool's errand, right? Whenever you're trying to predict the future, that's pretty darn tough. I mean, if I was really good at it, I probably wouldn't be on this call. I'd be sitting on a beach somewhere, drinking a margarita and retired. But that's what it requires us to do. And so the challenge with college athletes in particular right now is there's no historical basis for understanding how much money they may be able to make. But with that said, people have been licensing their name, image, and likeness and using it in different commercial ventures for quite a long time. What we normally would do for an established athlete who has experience doing this kind of stuff and making money from NIL rights is we look to the past and see, hey, how much money have you made in the past? What kind of deals have you done? What kind of promotional deals have you done? How else have you monetized the rights of your publicity? And then we'll basically use that as a basis for thinking about what may be available to them in the future. Obviously, if you're sitting there and you're actually in talks with people around deals that might generate revenue for you, understanding what those potential deals may be, or if you even have a contract in place already to make money, you have a better sense for what that future projection looks like. But ultimately, it requires a lot of, it's a speculative process of trying to figure out how am I going to make money in the future and how much money can I make. And then, ultimately, once there are established data points in the marketplace where people are doing deals and getting paid, using those market data points is a good. Nicole, I think you're not on mute. Nicole, if you want to, there we go. So anyway, thanks for taking that up, Dan. It is an interesting space. There was a really huge case coming out of the U.S. tax court recently where Michael Jackson's right of publicity was valued by. It was an issue around the value of his estate after he passed away 10 years ago. They're still fighting about it today. One expert thought it was worth hundreds of millions. The state thought it was worth thousands of dollars, and ultimately a court decided what it was worth, and ended up being fairly low value because when he passed away, Michael Jackson, his publicity rights were fairly low value because he had a lot of negative publicity around him when he passed. So there is a lot of stuff out there around valuation of NIL rights, and that particular case was a big one for folks like myself who are interested in this area. Let's talk a little bit about athletes' use of NIL rights in the nonprofit space specifically. I wonder if one of you guys could talk about how traditionally have athletes used their NIL rights to help promote nonprofits. What do those relationships look like? Are they prevalent? And how have nonprofits used those rights to help their cause? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. Athletes traditionally, I obviously until now worked with professional athletes as opposed to college athletes, but many of them create their own philanthropic efforts, their own charities. They have their own corporate entities. A lot of them actually file trademark applications and register the names and the design marks surrounding those charitable efforts. But to the extent that we're talking about NIL, name, image, and likeness, obviously it's the athletes who are rendering their own persona to the benefit of the philanthropy, typically without any sort of written agreement in place, because it's really just not needed. Because if it is in fact their own charitable effort, something that they own. But if it's with regard to a third party, certainly that would be something you would want to have in writing to ensure that everyone understands what the respective rights are and what the extent of the usage is and for how long it can be, the rights can be used, and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Dan, anything you wanted to add on that point?
I think it's just a fairly prevalent thing for athletes to get involved in trying to use some of their influence and their fame to get involved in a cause that they care a lot about. I think you see it all the time in pro sports, and in the conversations I've had in the past, 6 to 9 months with college athletes and companies that are going to be working with college athletes, a lot of what people who are educating those students right now on what they should be doing and how they should be building their brand have focused a lot on finding encouraging athletes to find things that they are genuinely passionate about, and then aligning themselves with those things as they start to sell the rights to their name, image, and likeness. And for many of them, that will end up in some sort of charitable way. I know that there are a lot of folks interested in doing sort of 50-50 splits, right, where maybe they get money and they also give half of the money to a cancer society or something else like that they're interested in. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those deals start to come to light in just the next few weeks. It's something we've seen in college sports that coaches have done for a long time. There's a big Coaches versus Cancer campaign where they all wear sneakers that have kind of specific messages on them, and then raffle them off or auction them off for charity. And I think you'll see a lot of that kind of stuff as the space continues to expand for college athletes.
Yeah, and I know that just within the last couple of months, we've seen a couple of examples of athletes using NFTs specifically to support nonprofit efforts and to raise money for nonprofits. So I know that I think it was a couple months ago that Trevor Lawrence, who was recently drafted by Jacksonville Jaguars, he teamed up with Adidas, and Adidas and Trevor produced some essentially like NFTs that related to just his image. I mean, they were like basically cards, commemorative cards that with Trevor Lawrence's image on them, and they worked together to auction those off. And the money then went to a bunch of charities around Jacksonville. So you're already seeing, even though the NFT space is pretty nascent right now, you're already seeing athletes and nonprofits, and corporations who want to be part of this as well, work together to monetize NFTs for nonprofits benefits. So I think that's really interesting. And I suspect you're going to see a lot more of it. I will say it's a lot easier to raise money using an NFT than a lot of traditional avenues that athletes had, right? A lot of times, if you think back to how athletes have used their name, image, and likeness in the past outside of an NFT context, a lot of times they'd have to be places. You'd have to go to an event to raise money, and that's now all of a sudden you can be wherever you are in the world. Work remotely with someone to create an NFT, put that up on an exchange to sell, and this could all be done a lot more efficiently. So I think a lot of athletes, frankly, are probably excited about the opportunities where their personal time and effort is less in need than just the name, image, and likeness, which anyone could use anywhere at any time since it's intangible. So I think that's kind of an interesting differentiation that NFTs bring to the space.
Yeah, I think one of the most consistent things that I've heard, and people trying to think through what the marketplace will look like and how college athletes will take advantage of some of these opportunities has been that, the amount of creativity that can go into this makes it hard to predict all the different options that could be out there in the future, and allowing them to sort of let their imaginations run wild. And I think, NFTs would be a place where that kind of thing would happen, where I'm sure there are clever students out there who are thinking of ways to take advantage of sort of like digital ways to sell the rights to their name, image, and likeness, or own the rights to their name, image, and likeness, and share those with others that haven't even crossed our minds yet. Even those of us have been thinking about it for a while and trying to puzzle through all the different possibilities of what might come up. So I think it'll be a really exciting time and interesting time to see all the creative ways and the creative partnerships that people come up with in order to kind of find things that are both they're passionate about and can create some interest and some value.
Yeah, and one of the things, we talk about this idea, and this Trevor Lawrence example that I brought up is a good one, where he's basically, they're selling NFTs, they're taking the proceeds and giving them to charities. That's obviously one kind of business model, so to speak. I think there's other ways that athletes can get involved in this as well. So it's just as an example, what I understand is that the author or creator of an NFT may actually be able to receive ongoing royalties every time that NFT is sold. And so they can make money after the initial sale and auction of the NFT. And so you can imagine a scenario where an athlete might give an NFT to a charity, have that charity auction off the NFT, but as the original owner of that NFT, the charity might actually be able to make ongoing revenue as that NFT is sold from, by collectors over time. And as the price of that NFT, if it were to go up, there's more and more money to be made. So there are some, I think, really interesting creative ways that athletes and nonprofits can work together to make ongoing revenue streams for the nonprofits. It also occurs to me that an athlete, obviously athletes want to do good, but everyone's always trying. A lot of people are interested in, what am I going to get out of something? Obviously, it's great to be a part of a nonprofit and be associated with them. I can imagine a scenario perhaps where athletes start donating NFTs to nonprofits and receiving potentially some sort of tax write-off associated with a donation, and then the nonprofit can go out and resell that and continue to make money from it. So that may be a way to entice people to get more involved in this area if there's some actual economic benefit. I know that it'll be interesting to see how the IRS addresses that over time as they look carefully at how donations, if this were to happen, how those donations are valued, because there's always this opportunity to overvalue donations to get a bigger tax write-off from them than you may be willing to accept. So folks like myself who think about appraising NFTs, it's going to be on us to kind of figure out how to do that properly. Let's talk a little bit about the nature of the legal protections, Darren, if we could. My understanding, not as a lawyer but as a layman, is that, I think you kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, but my understanding is that there's I want to say a lot of confusion to some extent over legal rights, because there is no, as I understand it, federal laws around name, image, and likeness or right of publicity rights. And so it comes down to states' laws. Some states, I understand, have statutes, some have common law rights. But these people are moving around, right? I guess I'm curious, how do the states' rights kind of interact with each other when someone, you mentioned earlier, someone could be from a certain part of the country, but you're a college student, you're actually going to school in a different state. and then maybe you have connections to other places. How does that all work? And I'm curious if you think that eventually there might be some coming together with a national law that would override and the states' laws. Do you have any? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So at least from my perspective, the domicile of the athlete would be wherever the athlete is attending school. And that would be the state's laws or precedent that controls. To the extent that there's a contract between the athlete and the third party, the contract should specify the jurisdiction and the choice of law if there is any dispute between those parties. And that's one thing, we haven't even started, or Dan and his colleagues haven't even started to look into, is what happens if there's actual disputes between the athletes and the brands that are going to be entering into deals. We're so focused on the potential for deals themselves and how much money it's going to be and, so on and so forth. We're not even thinking about the disputes, but certainly you would hope that the contracts specify the jurisdiction, the choice of law, and the dispute resolution, whether it be arbitration, first mediation, or in a court of law. As you mentioned, Scott, if there's a national law, that's going to likely preempt all of the state laws. The people that I've spoken to on Capitol Hill seem to indicate that there is consensus, at least on that issue, where there's not consensus on many other issues. So it's an if, though. And I don't even know if it is a when anymore. I used to say that it was. I don't know that Congress will ultimately do something, to be honest. There are too many partisan issues at play at this point. So ultimately right now it's left to the individual states and their respective state laws, as I mentioned, or the precedent that's been established by the cases.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. I think whether or not Congress acts may depend on what happens in the next 2 or 3 months as some of these, marketplace kind of comes into shape and they decide whether or not they really need to press for a national law as some of the disputes that Darren referenced start to come to light are we going to have athletes suing their schools based on some of the restrictions they placed on them, or how are those things going to play out? Certainly if you're a school that is relying on recruiting and retaining talent on a regular basis, you don't want to be locked in a bunch of legal battles with your athletes. So that'll be a really tricky, interesting thing to see as it plays out over the next couple of months. But yeah, as Darren said, there's a lot of gridlock right now, even around what started out as looking like it was going to be a really bipartisan issue of getting Congress to create a national law for some of this stuff and create a little bit more clarity on what could be done and what can't be done. They found some partisan divide in there, and right now it seems like they're a long way off from having a national law.
Thanks for that, gentlemen. I want to stop for a moment. For those attending, our moderator who was supposed to moderate this panel didn't show up today. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. So I certainly want to elicit from the audience any questions you guys have. You're more than welcome to type them into the chat box, and Darren and Dan and I would be happy to address specific questions. We talked a little bit about valuation of NIL rights earlier. I'm going to take a minute to talk a little bit more about the valuation of NFTs, which we haven't really touched on too much. So while I mentioned earlier that NIL rights are typically valued kind of using what we call an income approach, this idea of how much money can you make from them in the future, from those rights in the future. The primary method for valuing NFTs right now appears to be more of what I would call a market-based approach. So basically the idea is, it's kind of like how you might value your home, right? If you ever bought a home and got a mortgage, you go out and your appraiser would look in your neighborhood to see what other similar homes sold for recently. And so if your neighbor's home sold for $100,000 last week, and it's about the same size as yours, just as old, maybe yours is worth $100,000 as well. And I think that we're heading towards valuing NFTs in a very similar way. Basically, all of the transactions associated with NFTs are publicly available. So we can actually figure out what people have paid for what NFTs at any given point in time. So the goal would be, if you had an NFT, maybe let's just say it's a video clip from the NBA, for example, as part of their Top Shots program, or Hot Shots program, what you might do is go and see, well, what have other people paid for these same types of videos? And you might use that as guidance for thinking about what something would be worth. And so over time, although again, it's a nascent area, over time, there's gonna be a lot more transactions. And so you'll have to kind of search and sort through them all to find things that are comparable to whatever it is you're valuing, and use those data points as guidance for what something might be worth. So that's how I see the valuation of NFTs happening right now. Now, the pricing on NFTs is really dynamic right now because it's so new. You see some really, really high amounts of money being paid for some NFTs. You see lots of things that have very low values. So it's a bit of an ornery type of area, but over time, I would expect that things would kind of settle down and and pricing would be established a little more evenly across the board. So it'll be interesting if that's what happens over time. Gentlemen, we still have some more time here. We've kind of gone through most of the questions that I had written down as we prepared without our moderator. I'm curious, Dan or Darren, if you had other topics that you wanted to chat about and provide some insight into on this topic.
I think we covered a lot of, if anybody has any other questions we haven't addressed, I think we covered a lot of the bases. I'm just, kind of be really interested to see what kind of partnerships and splits and stuff like that athletes can come up with in this space in the future. I think is we're sort of at the cusp of having a lot of interesting new stuff to talk about. But to me right now, it's sort of a wait and see for a lot of how this is going to play out and be used.
Darren, I don't see any comments or questions from the audience. Darren, any final remarks from you on the topic? I don't want to keep people here and just talk for the sake of talking. It seems like we've covered it, the topic fairly well. Anything else in your mind, Darren?
No, I think you did a great job moderating. I know you weren't necessarily preparing to do that, but no, thank you for doing that. And hopefully whoever's watching this on the recording benefits from it. And I'm sure in days, weeks, months, everything that we've said will not be relevant anymore. So, this is a very fluid area. Everything's changing very quickly. If you would have asked me 2 weeks ago what the NCAA is going to do, I thought they were going to pass legislation that was developed many months ago. So things are changing very quickly. But again, thank you for doing this, and good seeing you, Dan.
Well, thanks to everyone who joined. Appreciate your time today. Sorry that we couldn't fill up the full hour for you without one of the folks who's going to be speaking, but hopefully you got something out of this, and certainly feel free to reach out to Darren, Dan, or I separately if you'd like to chat about the topic further. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thanks for having me.